With a Cheshire grin, Guinevere retrieved the beckoning orb from the trembling hands of the temple guard.
Wait.
He called after her as she turned around to leave.
What is it?
The guard seemed to hesitate at this.
You are the child of prophecy, the last mother.
Yes.
Guinevere prompted him.
Well, we were kind of hoping that you would stay.
Guinevere shook her head, tucking away the shimmering green orb within the confines of her pack.
I know, pagan.
But your bloodline. Surely you must know.
Guinevere was growing quite tired of this man's persistence. She was not of his religion, she merely possessed blood that he thought he could exploit. Her eyes began to glow through the musty darkness, causing the man to involuntarily back away.
For one who knows of my true nature, you seem ever so eager to antagonize it. Are you so sure that's wise?
She growled.
No, milady. 1,000 pardons.
The man gave a slight bow.
You now have the artifact you seek. Perhaps in time you shall return to aid us as a sign of your...
A second hard glare from Guinevere quickly caused the man to rephrase his last word from gratitude.
Utmost love for the natural world.
Don't count on it.
And with that, she exited the temple. No sooner had she emerged into daylight, when Guinevere pulled free her newfound trinket. The orb was composed of bright green glass, with an etching of a leaf burned into the side. A wild nature magic bloomed forth at her touch, and caused the orb to glow and vibrate.
A fine piece.
A voice called from above, startling her. Guinevere felt a rush of hot air. She looked down to her orb again, only to find that it had vanished.
What?
She exclaimed. As she began searching in blind frustration, the voice called out to her again.
Who knew that such treasures had yet to be plundered by the Baron's men?
Guinevere ground her teeth until she caught sight of something sprinting just beyond her line of sight. She spun around and nearly collided with her teacher. Garrett stood, towering over her, orb in hand, and a firm look of unpleasantness spread wide across his face.
Garrett? What are you doing out here?
The thief bounced the mysterious green orb within his gloved hand, never taking his eyes off of his eloped student.
I'd ask you the same question.
He stopped short and began to examine the orb again.
If I didn't already have my answer.
The next look he gave her caused a shiver to run down her spine. Garrett held his gaze, locking his disdain and disapproval into the confines of her deep green eyes. He had seldom been this furious with anyone, and somehow Guinevere knew this.
Garrett, please. I can explain.
I've been aware of your goings-on during daylight hours for weeks, Guinevere. Did you really think that you could outfox me? To be honest, I really don't believe a damn thing Basil says about you. At first, I had to be cautious and take it all in stride. But after being around you for nearly 2 months, I now consider you trustworthy. And no, I do not believe that you will sell me out.
His words came as a revelation to her. He trusted her. He finally saw beyond her status and skill level, and down to the heart of her true intentions. A smile would have found her face, if Guinevere hadn't been aware of just how upset her mentor truly was.
The city was no problem. I was rather impressed by how stealthy you've become. I've rarely seen you rely on magic either. I was content to simply watch you from afar as you trained, never letting on. It was clear that you not only respected my influence, but also sought to better yourself, even without me. That was very commendable, Guinevere.
This time, the young woman could not hide her pleasure. A slight but deep red blush found her cheeks.
Thank you.
But this is another matter entirely.
Garrett sneered, ruining her feelings of pride and affection.
What the hell were you thinking coming out here? Even a thief as skilled as myself would never be caught in pagan territory, unless there was a reward of great significance waiting at the end.
But the orb!
Is nothing. It looks pretty, but in my professional opinion, it's just a piece of junk.
He interrupted coldly. His long fingers rubbed against the outline of the soft green sphere. In an instant, his hand retracted, and he thrust the orb to her feet. The mossy earth sank into a slight indent as the relic's weight crashed into the forest floor.
Foolish girl, don't you understand? You could have lost your life over this trivial pagan garbage.
I had my reasons for acquiring it, okay?
Guinevere barked back. Garrett's expression tensed. He didn't appreciate that she was talking back to him like this.
Yeah, what was the reason?
The young woman turned away. As much as she wanted to, as much as she needed to. No, she could never tell him that.
I can't explain.
Of course you can. This was pure folly, and it will never happen again.
Her teacher snarled. Guinevere yipped as the thief took up her chin between his index finger and thumb, forcing her to stare into his bi-colored lenses. The right eye seemed to bore a deep hole into her subconscious as it held her captivated.
Is that clear?
Still mesmerized by the supernatural luster emanating from his stern gaze, Guinevere managed a modicum of weak acknowledgement.
Yes.
The thief's hand dropped her. But unbeknownst to him, the young woman was still captured within his eyes.
Good. Then let us return to the clock tower.
Without waiting for her to follow, Garrett began to trudge his way back through the dense forest. Making certain that he wasn't watching her, Guinevere retrieved the orb and stuffed it back into her pack. Then, she scampered to catch up with him. Garrett progressed through the misty plain of blue and white. The remainder of the world around him was lost in a sea of perpetual darkness. In the distance, he could hear a faint humming sound, and the whispering of several lost spirits.
Garrett, what are you doing?
A woman's voice rang through the hazy recollections of his dreamscape, clear and strong.
Aaron.
The thief struggled to remain unfazed. This was a dream, nothing more. It had to be.
Why did you leave me that night? Did you want me to fall? Did you want me to die?
No.
He replied softly.
No, I never wanted that.
The voice then grew aggressive and forceful, more so than Garrett had ever remembered it being in life.
Was I just not a good enough student for you? Do you really think that she's any better?
Erin's voice chortled as Garrett began to blindly search the pathway before him. He appeared to be confined, trapped between a wall of light blue poppies and a set of crude iron bars.
It's not fun to be trapped, is it? Thrown away with the firm intent of being forever forgotten.
Aaron, why are you doing this? You put me through this nearly every night.
Garrett hollered, trying to break out of his surreal prison.
You know that I did everything I could for you. Is this how you intend to repay me?
The young teen's voice was broken apart by maniacal laughter. He knew this voice didn't belong to Erin.
Pitiful mean fool. Slayer of our God, you've taken upon yourself to now steal away our last link to the old ways?
Garrett was thrashing now, desperate to escape his prison, escape the torments of this nightmare.
What are you talking about?
The girl, you cannot have her.
Guinevere, you mean? I have no intention of keeping her.
A demonic roar shattered the iron bars of the prison, and caused the poppies behind Garrett to wither and die. The thief sank to his knees, stark terror in his eyes at the being presented to him. An unspeakable evil now surrounded him, grabbed at him. He began to hyperventilate.
No, this isn't possible.
You seek to taint her bloodlines, manful. We can seize it.
The voice hissed.
I don't understand.
You takes her away from us. You makes her like you. Takers away her magics.
I have no desire to rob Guinevere of her power. Why would I want such a thing?
Yous no wants the magics. You justy wants the girl. Yous wants to takers her for yourselves.
Garrett nearly smirked at such an accusation. First Barso, now the demons of his very nightmares were convinced that he wanted to bed his apprentice.
I'm afraid that you're very badly mistaken, demon. You're under the assumption that I would allow myself to be flayed and quartered over such a trivial thing as feelings.
We sees you. You look sees at her. You think sees that she's beauteous.
Garrett, now fully recovered from the initial shock of having his dream world invaded by pagan influence, began to grow quite smug at these outrageous accusations.
Yes, I do think she's attractive. That doesn't mean that I'm going to allow her to get in the way of my work.
Yous already are.
I'm sorry?
The thief raised an eyebrow. The being's next words caused his skin to turn a sickly shade of white, and their impact left him helpless.
Why's you wait so long to steal the book sees? You wants her to comes with you to the place where the pretties dwell. You wants her to comes. You wants her.
It isn't like that.
Garrett defended. Suddenly, another voice broke through the red mist. That haunting voice that he had tried so very hard to forget.
Garrett. Stop this folly before it gets you killed. You've been alone your entire life. Get used to it. Do not falter in your age. In your mortal deformity. She cannot help you. She can barely help herself. I warn you. Abandon the budding feelings you have for this girl. I will not allow you to obstruct the ancient texts.
Garrett's eyes grew heavy at the unseen spirit's words. He fought to remain upright, but found that he was losing his footing. His mind flashed a single image of Guinevere's green eyes, now riddled with terror and agony. Then, he blacked out. The thief shot upright, drenched in a pool of sweat. Guinevere was resting on the stairway. This time, he hadn't awakened her. Garrett scanned the dark clock tower. No amount of thought or deciphering could possibly hope to explain what he had just witnessed. However, he had known the last voice, and he knew that she had been serious in her words. Garrett shuddered. What was that look he had seen in Guinevere's eyes? Why had he seen it? That was what had frightened him most of all. He watched as the young woman continued to slumber, her body rising and falling in place. She was the first woman he had ever allowed to access his dwelling. Whenever the need had arisen, the thief had always sought out women who had their own places of residence to do the deed. He never brought any of them home with him. He couldn't risk letting anyone know where he lived. The irony that the first woman to ever learn his address also brought the most risk of him being found made him frown. And yet, Garrett knew that she wouldn't betray him. It wasn't anything that she had said. He just knew. Guinevere was about as much a threat to him as a small child, and she was just as innocent as any newborn babe. The girl muttered something in her sleep, then rolled over and clung to her silken navy cape. Garrett began to reflect on his nightmare. Were the beings indeed correct? Did he want her? The notion caused him to shake his head violently.
No. She's just another.
Garrett?
Guinevere moaned in the darkness. The thief stared at her. Both of her luminous eyes were still closed. She was talking in her sleep.
Garrett, I'm sorry.
The thief listened intently as she began to moan and thrash. Guinevere scrunched her eyelids tighter together and suddenly burst out into a loud scream.
No! Don't! Don't! I'm sorry!
She pleaded. Garrett's eye quaked with emotion. The girl resting before him was reacting to something. Something that was no doubt trying to harm her. Without thinking, he opened his mouth, yelling after her.
Guinevere!
The young woman only shook more violently.
No! Please! Please! Not that! Ah!
Her last scream was flooded with a very real agony, as if she were being tortured within her very mind. In an instant, Garrett reacted. He was on his feet. Without his right eye in, his depth perception was limited, and he stumbled slightly as he made his way across the floorboards, before reaching his distraught pupil. His mind was racing, anxiety gripping at his chest. He was eager to deliver her from whatever lurked just beyond her submissive, trembling form.
Guinevere, wake up!
He demanded, shaking her. Guinevere opened her eyes with one final scream. When she looked at Garrett, her eyes were wide and riddled with near insanity. The thief breathed heavily.
It was just a dream.
Yes, I know, Garrett.
Guinevere replied, a bit embarrassed to be discovered in such a vulnerable state. She examined his face in the candlelight, but abruptly turned upon noticing that his right eye socket was empty. She remembered what had transpired the last time that she had gawped at Garrett's old scar. A tender hand found her shoulder, and she tensed.
It's all right.
He spoke in a strange, soft tone.
You can look at me.
Guinevere hesitated, but slowly let her eyes meet her teacher's concerned expression.
Guinevere, what happened?
She could not stop sobbing. What she had just been forced to endure, what she would eventually have to endure in reality, it was all too much. Garrett pulled her cape up over her shoulders and knelt beside her on the stairway. Guinevere began to relax. He was with her now, and his very presence blanketed her in a comfort that she would have thought impossible for her to find that night. She snuggled her backside and shoulders against him.
I had a nightmare.
She stated the obvious.
As did I. It seems that they're going around.
He joked. Guinevere managed a weak smile. She had come to love Garrett's dry humor. The thief watched her smile, and his heart sank to his knees. Seeing her now filled him with a deep sense of both fear and desire. In the darkness of the clock tower, Guinevere's green eyes flashed like those of a wild animal. He could sense it. The great, potentially fatal power that this girl possessed, and yet she remained as placid and weak as a startled lamb.
Guinevere, you've been sleeping on these hard steps for nearly 2 months now.
He started. Guinevere looked up at him, hopefully. The thief hesitated. He wasn't quite certain how his next words would sound, let alone if he indeed wished to speak them. But logic and reasoning could not hope to distract him from the intense horror he now saw in his student.
Why don't you rest with me tonight?
A brilliant pink hue dashed across the young woman's face like starlight. When he realized what she assumed he had just asked of her, Garrett's own expression grew hot and uncomfortable.
Just asleep. I will not touch you, Guinevere.
He corrected quickly.
I understand.
She smiled, a touch sadly. Garrett breathed a deep sigh, completely missing the yearning in her voice. He stood and led her to the right side of his bed. He watched her pull back the thin, dirty sheets and slide onto the mattress. She snuggled against the dusty old fibers, the first real comfort she had felt in so long. Garrett sighed and reluctantly got in on the left side. As the thief struggled to situate himself, he felt Guinevere wrap her arm around his defined chest. He froze.
I wouldn't get used to this. It's only for tonight. I have no interest in making love to you. I want to make that very clear.
He grumbled before shifting slightly.
I know.
Guinevere yawned, hugging him tighter.
Good.
But Garrett?
Yes?
He asked, growing slightly annoyed by her constant pestering.
Why then?
Because.
He murmured, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did.